I'd never known the sound of a house could change, that after my husband passed, the same walls that had echoed with laughter could grow so quiet they pressed against your ears like cotton. The only sound that afternoon was the tick of the old brass clock he'd wound every Sunday, and the shush of my slippers on the carpet as I moved through each room, searching. I'd looked everywhere, under the mattress, behind the books in the study, even inside the bread box where I'd once hidden birthday presents from the grandchildren. My hands were trembling as I opened the last place I could think of, the jewelry chest, a gift from Richard on our 30th anniversary. The lid creaked as it always had, but when I lifted the little velvet tray, my heart stuttered. Empty. The blue velvet pocket that had cradled my mother's sapphire brooch for 40 years lay flat. I pressed my fingers into it as if the stone might reappear if I just believed hard enough. I stood there a long moment, listening to the blood thudding in my ears. They'd told me it was normal to forget things at my age, where I'd put the keys, whether I'd locked the door, if I'd taken my morning pills. But this wasn't a lapse. This was something else. I turned to the window. Outside, the roses Richard planted were in bloom, nodding in the breeze. The same breeze that fluttered the lace curtains, lifting a scrap of paper from the side table and dropping it near my feet. I bent slowly, my knees protesting, and picked it up. A receipt. My name, Evelyn Parker, typed neatly along the top, and beneath it, the words that made my stomach twist. Golden Star Pawn. My mind went back over the last week. Every moment that had seemed off, but I'd pushed aside. Claire fussing in my bedroom, saying she was tidying up. Daniel urging me to rest, closing the door behind me as if I were a child. Claire's voice floating down the hallway. She won't remember. I had thought she was talking about my tea, but no. I pressed my palm to my chest, willing my heartbeat to settle. I tried to remind myself that I was still the woman who'd nursed Richard through 3 surgeries, who'd raised a son on a shoestring budget, who'd fought off a burglar in her kitchen with nothing but a broom. I was not frail. I was not confused. I walked to the hall mirror and looked at my reflection. Pale, lined, hair pinned back in a silver knot. For a moment I almost didn't recognize her, but her eyes were steady, angry, clear. I folded the receipt carefully and tucked it into my purse. The purse itself was older than Claire, worn at the corners, but still sturdy, like me. The sun had shifted by the time I fastened my coat and stepped onto the porch. My neighbor, Mrs. Fulton, waved from her stoop. I lifted a hand in return, trying to keep my expression neutral. I didn't want gossip, not yet. The walk to the driveway felt longer than usual. My bones ached in a way they hadn't before Richard died. But I told myself this was necessary. I would not let them make me doubt my own mind. As I opened the car door, I heard an engine idling. I turned, slowly, deliberately, and saw Claire's silver SUV parked halfway down the block, just beyond the hydrangea hedge. My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't even trying to hide it. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I should go back inside, pretend I hadn't seen, call someone else to handle this. But then I pictured my mother's brooch, the deep blue of it catching the light on my wedding day. I felt something old and solid lock into place inside me. I eased into the driver's seat, shut the door, and started the engine. Claire's car didn't move. I pulled out of the drive with my hands steady on the wheel, my gaze fixed ahead. Whatever she thought, I was not someone who could be quietly robbed and patted on the cheek like an old fool. I was Evelyn Parker, and I was going to get my things back. The drive into town was only 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Every stop sign, every traffic light seemed to flicker with accusation, as if the world itself knew what was happening behind my closed doors. I tried not to look in the rearview mirror, but a part of me couldn't help it. Claire's silver SUV followed at a distance, never close enough to be obvious, but never so far I could forget she was there. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My hands looked thinner than I remembered, the veins ridged like dry riverbeds. I thought about all the times those hands had braided Daniel's hair when he was small, had packed his lunch, had tucked him in with the quilt my mother sewed. The same mother who'd left me that sapphire brooch. For when you're older and wiser, she'd said with a wink. I wondered what she'd think of me now. The town had changed since Richard and I first moved here. New stores where the old five and dime used to be, bright banners advertising condos. But Golden Star Pawn hadn't changed. Same chipped sign, same dusty windows, same brass bell over the door that jangled when I stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked up from a ledger. Mr. Harris. I'd known him 20 years, though never as anything more than the man who'd fixed Richard's watch or appraised my grandmother's locket. His hair had gone greyer, but his eyes were still kind. "Mrs. Parker," he said, surprise softening his voice. "Everything all right?" I took a slow breath, feeling the warm rush of shame crawl up my neck. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." His brows drew together. "Of course." I opened my purse and laid the receipt on the counter. My hands were shaking now, but I didn't try to hide it. "Did my daughter-in-law bring this in?" He studied the paper, then lifted his gaze to mine. "You're certain you want to know?" The tears I'd been fighting all morning welled up, but I didn't let them fall. "Yes," he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mrs. Parker, I'm not supposed to." I leaned forward, my voice low. "I am not senile. I am not confused, and those pieces were never hers to sell." His eyes flickered past me, toward the window. I knew without turning that Claire was still out there, waiting. Finally, he nodded. "She was here 2 days ago. She said you wanted her to handle your affairs, that you were struggling." The shame turned to something hot and hard. Fury. "And you believed her?" I whispered. "I didn't know what to believe," he admitted. "But I recorded everything, just in case." He reached under the counter and pulled out a black binder. Flipping it open, he slid a photocopy across the glass. Claire's signature, scrawled in blue ink. Beside it, the list. Sapphire brooch, pearl necklace, engagement ring. My heart squeezed so tight, I thought I'd be sick. I closed my eyes. For a moment, all I could see was the day Richard slipped that ring on my finger. My hands so young then. My heart so hopeful. When I looked up, Mr. Harris was watching me gently. "I'm sorry," he said. I straightened my spine. "I'd like you to call the police." His eyebrows lifted. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded and reached for the phone. As he dialed, I turned to the window. Claire's SUV was gone. My pulse quickened. Was she on her way home to destroy more evidence, or to call Daniel and spin another story? I didn't know. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this be buried under polite silence. When Mr. Harris hung up, he met my gaze again. "Detective Ramirez will be here in 15 minutes. I swallowed. My mouth felt dry as dust. "Thank you." I rested my hand on the counter to steady myself. My legs felt like water, but my voice was strong when I spoke again. "I remember everything," I said softly, "and I won't be made to doubt it." Detective Ramirez arrived sooner than I expected. He stepped through the door with a quiet authority that filled the cluttered pawnshop. He was a tall man with a lined face that looked tired, but not unkind. "Mrs. Parker?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. "I'm Detective Ramirez. Mr. Harris called about a possible theft." I nodded, suddenly aware of how old I must look. Stooped, hair pinned back, hands trembling. But then I felt the small weight of the receipt in my pocket, and my resolve returned. "Yes," I said. "It was theft." He gestured to a stool near the counter. "Would you like to sit?" I almost refused out of stubbornness, but my knees were starting to ache. I perched on the stool and folded my hands in my lap. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked, pulling a small notepad from his coat. I took a slow breath. My voice didn't shake. "My daughter-in-law, Claire Parker, came into this shop 2 days ago with my jewelry. She told Mr. Harris I had given it to her to sell, that I was no longer capable of making decisions." Detective Ramirez scribbled something, then looked up. "Are you under any medical care for dementia or memory impairment?" The question made my cheeks burn. "No," I said firmly. I forget where I put my glasses sometimes, but that's all. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. I've known Mrs. Parker for years. She's never shown any signs of confusion. Ramirez nodded. Understood. He turned back to me. Do you have documentation that the jewelry was yours? I reached into my purse and pulled out a small leather folder. Inside were photographs. Me wearing the sapphire brooch on my wedding day. Richard fastening the necklace around my throat for our 40th anniversary. My hands didn't tremble as I handed them over. The detective examined each one carefully. These help. Do you have a list of everything missing? Yes. My voice was hoarse now, but still clear. And I know where she's keeping the rest. In my house. Hidden. Ramirez set the photos down. All right, Mrs. Parker. We'll open an investigation for theft and possible elder exploitation. The words hung in the air like a gavel falling. Some small, frightened part of me wanted to take it all back, to pretend none of this had happened, to let Daniel and Claire keep the jewelry if it meant I wouldn't feel this hollow ache in my chest. But then I thought of Richard's hands, steady as he'd fastened that necklace, the look in his eyes that day, full of love and trust. No, I sat up straighter. What happens next? Detective Ramirez met my gaze evenly. We'll need to recover the remaining items, and we'll be speaking to your son and daughter-in-law. If you're willing to pursue charges, we'll go from there. I nodded. My throat was tight, but I didn't look away. I'm willing, I said. By the time I pulled back into my driveway, the afternoon had waned into that dull grey that comes before dusk. I sat in the car for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel, gathering the strength to face what waited inside. I had barely stepped onto the porch when the front door swung open. Daniel stood there, looking pale and dishevelled, as if he hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, and for an instant he looked like the little boy who used to run to me after skinning his knee. "Mum," he started, voice hoarse. Just let me explain." I didn't answer. I walked past him into the living room. The curtains were drawn, making everything feel smaller, as if the walls were closing in. Claire sat stiffly in my husband's old armchair, her legs crossed neatly, her manicured hands clasped in her lap. She didn't rise. I took my time removing my coat and folding it over the back of the sofa. Only then did I look at her. "Where is the rest?" I asked. Her eyebrows arched, her mouth curling into a small, pitying smile. The rest of what? I felt the air leave my lungs. For a heartbeat, I thought I might sway on my feet. But I caught the edge of the table, grounding myself. "My jewelry?" I said, voice low. "The necklace, the ring, the brooch you didn't get a chance to sell." Daniel stepped closer, hands outstretched as if to calm me. "Mum, please, it's not what you think." "Isn't it?" I turned to him, my heart breaking all over again. "I have the receipt. I have Mr. Harris's statement. I have the detective's card in my purse." Claire let out a brittle laugh. "You're confused. You're making this into something it isn't. You gave me that jewelry. You said you didn't want to be burdened with it anymore." I looked her in the eye and knew then that she would never admit the truth. She would rather see me doubt my own mind than own her theft. "No," I said. "I never gave you permission, and you know it." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Daniel shifted from foot to foot, his face crumpling. "Mum," Claire thought. "She thought maybe you'd be happier if—" I held up a hand. "No more lies." I walked to the small writing desk by the window and opened the top drawer. I pulled out a thin folder and turned back to them. My voice felt raw in my throat. "These are copies of the documents the detective gave me," I said, setting them on the coffee table. "I've filed a police report. They'll be contacting you both." Claire's composure slipped. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, her face lost that patronizing softness. She looked furious. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You're old. You don't understand how this will look." I took a step closer so she could see that I wasn't afraid. "I'm not the one who should be worried about appearances." Daniel swallowed hard. His eyes darted from me to Claire and back again. "Mum, please, this will ruin us." I thought of all the nights I'd lain awake after Richard died, worrying about whether Daniel was happy, whether I'd done enough as a mother, whether I was still needed. And then I realized, in the cold clarity of that moment, that love does not mean tolerating betrayal. "I want you to leave," I said. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Claire stared at me as if she couldn't believe I had any fight left. "You have until tomorrow morning," I added. "I will not share my home with thieves." No one moved. The silence rang in my ears. Finally, Claire stood. She brushed past me, her shoulder bumping mine. Daniel lingered a moment longer, his face crumpled with something that might have been shame. I didn't look back as I walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, and for the first time in months, my hand didn't tremble. The house felt cavernous after they left, every room echoing with the ghosts of arguments and memories I hadn't asked for. I moved from space to space, picking up the framed photographs, the little keepsakes Richard and I had collected across 45 years together. I didn't cry, not that night. In the morning, Detective Ramirez called. "Mrs. Parker," he said gently, "we have enough evidence to proceed with charges of theft and elder exploitation. Are you still prepared to move forward?" I looked out the kitchen window. The roses were wilting in the July heat. I pressed my fingers to the glass, remembering the day Richard planted them. The same day he told me, "You have to stand your ground, Evie, even when it's hardest." "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Ramirez paused, as if giving me one last chance to change my mind. When I didn't, he cleared his throat. "All right, I'll be in touch soon." I ended the call and set the phone down, feeling an unexpected lightness. A strange relief in having finally spoken the truth, even if it shattered what was left of my family. That afternoon, Mrs. Fulton knocked on my door with a covered dish of lasagna. She'd heard some talk, she said, but she didn't ask for details. She just pressed the warm casserole into my hands and said, "You did the right thing." When she left, I set the dish on the table and sat down, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I let the tears come then, slow and silent. For Richard, for Daniel, for the life I thought I still had. I must have sat there for an hour before I finally stood. I went to the bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. Carefully, I pulled out a small wooden box lined in blue velvet. The pieces that hadn't been stolen still lay inside: my wedding band, Richard's cufflinks, a little silver locket I'd worn as a girl. I touched each one, feeling the old memories stir. I thought about how easily someone can strip you of your past if you let them, how the world expects you to be docile when you're old. Not me. That evening, Ramirez called again. "Mrs. Parker, we've recovered some of your items from the shop. Would you like to come pick them up tomorrow?" I closed my eyes, feeling gratitude and sorrow all tangled together. "Yes," I said softly. "I would." As I hung up, the house felt a little less empty, a little more like my own again. The next morning dawned bright and unforgiving, the kind of light that shows every flaw, every crack in the walls. I was in the kitchen pouring my second cup of coffee when I heard the knock. It wasn't the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the official rap of the police. It was softer, almost apologetic. For a long moment, I considered not answering, letting whoever it was find their own way home. But something in me still hoped, foolishly, that my son might try to make things right. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mum," he said, voice raw. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He moved past me, pausing to look around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze lingered on the empty spaces where picture frames had once stood, frames I'd tucked away after the last argument. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, elbows resting on his knees. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick as old honey. Finally, he lifted his head. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I stayed standing, my hands folded neatly in front of me. "For what?" He swallowed hard. "For all of it. For letting her. For not stopping it." His voice broke, and he scrubbed a hand over his face. I thought maybe you were getting confused. She kept saying it was best for everyone, that you'd agreed to let her handle things. And He shook his head, shame radiating off him like heat. I didn't want to see the truth. I felt my heart ache. For the little boy he'd once been. For the man he'd become. "You chose the easier story," I said quietly. He nodded, eyes brimming. I did. For a moment I almost went to him, almost reached out to smooth his hair like I had when he was small. But then I remembered the weeks of doubt, the nights I lay awake, wondering if I was losing my mind. "Mum," he said again, voice trembling. "Please, don't press charges. Claire, she made mistakes, but she's scared. She thinks you'll ruin us." I felt something cold and steady slide into place behind my ribs. "I'm not the one who ruined anything," I said. His shoulders shook. I know that now." I moved to the armchair across from him and sat down, folding my hands in my lap. "Do you know what it feels like to be told you don't remember your own life?" He didn't answer, just bowed his head. "It feels like dying," I whispered, "like being erased piece by piece." He lifted his face, tears streaking his cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you did." My voice didn't waver. "You stood by and let her steal from me. Not just jewelry. Memories. My dignity." He looked like he was about to collapse in on himself. "What can I do?" I shook my head slowly. "That isn't a question for me to answer." We sat there a long time, the old clock ticking in the corner. Outside, the roses bent under their own weight, blossoms nodding in the breeze. Finally, he cleared his throat. If you press charges, I understand, but I had to come. I had to say I'm sorry." I studied him, this man I had raised, this stranger who had become my son, and I knew that forgiveness wasn't something I could offer yet. Maybe not ever. "I don't hate you," I said at last, "but I don't trust you." He closed his eyes. I could see the truth land like a blow. "I should go," he murmured. He stood slowly, as if every step cost him something. At the door, he paused and looked back. "I love you, Mum," he said, voice breaking. I didn't answer. After he left, I sat in the quiet for a long time. The old grief of losing Richard. The new grief of losing my son in another way. They braided together inside me, sharp and inescapable. But under the sorrow there was something else, a quiet certainty. I had done what I needed to do. That afternoon, Detective Ramirez called again. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "we've recovered the brooch. Would you like to come by the station?" I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." As I hung up the phone, the house felt both emptier and more my own than it had in years. I didn't hurry as I dressed. I chose the blue dress Richard had always liked, the one with the tiny white flowers that reminded him of our wedding. I pinned my hair back carefully, hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. It felt important somehow, to look like myself when I reclaimed what was mine. The drive to the station was quiet, no cars trailing behind me this time, no heart hammering in my throat, just the slow, inevitable unfolding of the truth. Detective Ramirez was waiting in the lobby when I arrived. He offered a small, respectful nod. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "we have everything catalogued for you." He led me down a narrow hallway to an unmarked room. Inside, a plain table held a small blue velvet pouch. The sight of it nearly took me to my knees. Ramirez paused, as if giving me a moment to collect myself. "I'm sorry you've had to go through this," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "I'm not sorry I stood up for myself." His mouth curved into something almost like a smile. That's good to hear. He stepped back, giving me space. I moved to the table and picked up the pouch. My fingers brushed over the worn velvet, remembering all the places it had been. Tucked in a drawer on my wedding night, locked in the safe when Daniel was born, hidden behind sweaters when times were uncertain. I eased it open and tilted it into my palm. The sapphire brooch slid out first, catching the fluorescent light in a flash of deep blue. I traced the familiar curve of the setting with my thumb, my mother's brooch. Her hands had fastened it to my collar on my wedding day, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Next came the pearl necklace, still gleaming despite everything. Richard had saved for nearly a year to buy it for me. He'd been so proud when he clasped it around my throat, whispering that I deserved every beautiful thing in the world. Last, the engagement ring. I held it up, watching the diamond catch the light. My throat closed, memory flooding in. His proposal on that windy hilltop, the way my heart had raced as I said yes. They were only things, and yet they were more than that. They were proof of a life fully lived, a love that had mattered. I closed my hand around them and felt something loosen in my chest. Ramirez cleared his throat. Do you have any questions about the next steps? I shook my head. No, you've done enough. Someone from victim services will be calling you, he said gently, to see if you need any help, practical or emotional. Thank you, I murmured. I slipped the pouch into my purse and straightened my shoulders. As I left the building, the summer sun broke through the clouds. The light was so bright it made me squint. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling it on my face, letting it warm the parts of me that had gone cold. I knew things wouldn't be simple from here. Daniel might never understand. Claire would fight to salvage whatever reputation she had left. There would be phone calls, lawyers, perhaps even more bitterness. But I also knew something else. I had survived this. I had not been erased. When I pulled into my driveway, the roses were in bloom again, soft petals unfurling despite everything. I got out of the car and stood a moment, watching them nod in the breeze. Inside, the house felt different. Still quiet, but no longer oppressive. The silence had changed. It was mine again. I set the purse on the kitchen table and took the jewelry out one piece at a time. I didn't lock them away this time. Instead, I placed the brooch in a glass dish where I could see it. The necklace on the small bust Richard had made me in his woodworking shop. The ring in a velvet-lined box on the mantel. Proof of memory, of endurance, of love. I made a cup of tea and carried it to the front porch. The late afternoon light turned the garden gold. I thought of my mother, my husband, the child I'd raised, and the woman I still was. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't confused. I was Evelyn Parker, and I remembered everything.